we're now moving on to the announcement of a scholarship. And to introduce this part of the event, I'd like to invite our CEO of Enable Ireland, John O'Sullivan, to introduce this part of the event and this initiative. Welcome, John.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. First of all, can I just say congratulations to you and the team for organising today and for the ongoing success of the course. And I want to be the first to congratulate the graduates who are no longer graduates and want them to welcome them to the long list of other graduates. Assistive technology is an important part of what we do in Enable Ireland, and we see the impacts that technology has on all our lives and how it continually evolves. And I suppose most recently for us, that has seen the development of the virtual adult service is something that we're all delighted in. But also I'm very struck there by Brian's research and how it further emphasises this point about how we can embrace technology and how you know it's becoming more and more mainstream. And as you said, Siobhan, almost impossible to keep up with. You know, today's graduates, they join a long list of others who went before them. I think Terry said 456, if I'm not mistaken. One of those was James Brosnan. And James was a visionary in many ways, originally from Kerry, living in Dublin most of his life. He thrived on education, as we learned over the years, a great supporter of the AT course and the AT service. As I mentioned, he was a graduate of the Foundations course, but also he was a contributor to the course in later years, and he was a guest lecturer throughout. He was also a great collaborator, and some examples of the work he was involved in the projects was developing iGaze games with Microsoft, working with Ger and the product design students in TU University, and also with students of Purdue University in the States. He was a tremendous speaker and was always challenging us to see technology in new ways. And I think we greatly miss him, but I think we're all the better for having known him and for having worked with him. So in James's honour, we're delighted to announce the James Brosnan Assistive Technology Scholarship. And this scholarship is going to be available to any person with a disability who is interested in completing the Foundations in AT course. It'll be available on an annual basis from 2023, and we'll post the details on the website later in the year about this. The scholarship will also include the provision of a laptop if the person doesn't have one, to help them complete the course. Finally, we've made a video in celebration of James's legacy, which we'd like to share with you now. So thanks for giving me the time to say a few words.
Thanks, John. We're actually going to just move the video down a little bit, John, but we're just a change in sequencing. But thank you very much. And I know you met and knew James and enjoyed his sense of humour as well, as we all did. I'm absolutely delighted now to welcome Mary-Louise O'Donnell, who was James's tutor in DCU. Mary-Louise, former senator and a very vibrant contributor to social discourse across a whole range of topics in Ireland. We're really honoured to have you here as our special guest in recognition of James Brosnan's legacy, Mary-Louise. So welcome, and please, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. You can hear me. Everybody can hear me. It was one of the things in lecturing in DCU, had to ask every morning, can everybody hear me? First of all, I'd like to say it's my privilege to have been invited here today to remember and commemorate and honour James Brosnan. I had maybe mentioned this before to some people, and Tara O'Shea might probably know of her great poet in America, Robert Frost. He was asked by the press, he was a brilliant, brilliant poet, and he was asked by the press in 1965, what do you think, Mr. Frost, is the greatest quality a human being can have? And the press all sat there thinking he was going to say love or passion or imagination. And he said, the greatest quality a human being can have is the quality of courage. And I think that if there is anything that is to exemplify what James Brosnan was, is that power of courage he had throughout his life. it's an interesting concept because it has in it the whole area of resilience and of acceptance, the courage to be resilient and to accept the world in which you find yourself. And his family had great courage, and I know they're here today, and his mother. And you know, DCU had great courage, and Enable Ireland has great courage, and Microsoft has great courage, and TU Dublin has great courage, because it's only with the involvement of all those organizations in technological advancement that somebody like James, whose courage is there for the taking, can actually be put into force. DCU, you know, is very interesting. I taught there from 1989. And I was head of radio in the School of Communications. And DCU showed a great way forward about disability. They did not see disability as something that would prevent students from actually being and becoming the people that they were capable of being and becoming. And they recognized their minds. It didn't matter whether they were physically impaired or whether they were blind or whether they were deaf or whether, didn't matter. These things didn't matter. It was their minds were alive. And that, like James Brosnan, they needed exactly the same level of education that all other able-bodied students could avail of. Because, you know, Milton is right, the mind is in its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. And James Brosnan had the idea, and always did, make a heaven of his situations. He was always alive to his situation. And when you think of somebody like Helen Keller, who was blind as well as deaf, and she wrote great books and traveled the world lecturing, you realize that DCU picked up something that had been foraged many, many years before, but they did it quite brilliantly. And James became fierce and independent and resilient and alive. He was very alive, very joyful, impactful, and he was as bold as brass. He was so bold, but he was bold of purpose, and he was bold of attitude, and he was bold of practice. And he was like the sponge who he soaked up all the education that came his way, and his ears and his eyes became his greatest conduit. And he became so alert to sound and to the power of sound and to sound made and to natural sound, electronic sound, technical sound, bird sound, speech sound, melody. And his ear became his greatest communicator. And he became an outstanding editor, because as an editor, you need to be able to hear what's not said. You need to be able to hear inflection and pause and stress. It's a world, you know, it's a world of communication that we sometimes forget in our world of visualization. So he could hear sounds already made, and he could hear sounds yet to be made. So he became absolutely brilliant. And of course, in radio, the ear, the aural faculty is the greatest faculty. So when he came to study radio with me for 5 years, literally from turning on the first voice to writing his thesis, which he got a first-class honours for, which was a play for voices, because he was terribly influenced by Dylan Thomas, who was the Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach of words. So James got it, he picked it, his ear was the most powerful instrument, and he was miles ahead. And he soared ahead like a technological eagle, very much higher than others, with the assistance of all, as I say, the technology around. I went to tea in his room once. He had a technological room. I knew nothing about technology at the time, except I knew how to splice edit and I knew how to talk. But I went to tea in his room, and the door opened automatically and the chair sat down automatically, and he was surrounded by screens. He had help, of course, he had human help there, but his life was full of the joys of university and the societies and what he was going to do and become, and interviewing and people on the campus and making little tapes and making little documentaries. And he was so alive, and that he brought so much energy to everybody, shock and awe and energy to all the students around. I think what I could say really is that he lived brilliantly in a world that welcomed him with certain limitations, but he never let them get in his way. And I have been an educationalist most of my life. I come from a long line of them. But it is very rare that a student will turn an educationalist and have more to offer the person who's supposed to be imparting the great art to them and teach you. And he taught me an awful lot about it. Now, never to forget that the mind in front of you is the great gift of imagination and creativity. It's not what you see. It's their minds and how their minds can be brought alive. He was fundamental. He was as fundamental to technology and to radio as sound is. I'm going to leave you with the final verse of, again, Robert Frost, the great American poet. He wrote a poem that we all know, but sometimes we don't pay a lot of attention to it, A Road Less Taken. And the last verse, he says, I shall be telling this with a sigh. And we all are kind of today, because he has left us. But he's still with us in memory. But he said, somewhere ages and ages since, two roads diverged into a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Because if you look at all of us being brought together, it makes a great difference. So he made an enormous, immeasurable difference and contribution to all our lives. And I will leave you with the thought that he was a pioneer, but he was also a pirate. Thank you. Thank you.
That's just wonderful. Thank you very much, Mary-Louise. You've summed up James and all his multifaceted aspects so beautifully, really. And I know he really, really loved his time in DCU. It was a very rich time. And with that, I'm now really delighted to say that we are lucky enough to have James's family here, as you mentioned, Mary-Louise. Catherine Brosnan, Martin and Hugh, his brothers, are here along with Catherine, his mum. So, Catherine, I'd like to invite you to say a few words about your incredible son, James, and we'd be delighted to hear from you.
We are overwhelmed with joy to hear about this Assistive Technology Scholarship, which celebrates James's legacy. His brothers, Martin, Hugh and myself, would like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for such an honour. I hope he is watching on from heaven in the arms of his dad, who, knowing him, is probably in tears of joy watching his son receive such an honour. I remember all the wonderful people James met in the CRC and Mount Temple and finally in DCU, and wish to thank them on his behalf. I could go on all day, but I will finish with a poem he wrote when he was about 16 to the retiring headmaster of Mount Temple. Up and down the green hills and in and out of the spring-covered meadows he searched. The dancing daffodils and the dainty daisies could not satisfy him. But one cloud-covered day he found me, a leftover little leaf in a forgotten forest left to decay. He examined me more closely than others ever did. He saw something in me that no one saw before. And look, here I am, in a place where I always belong. Now flowers are queuing to be where I am. I am here today to say thanks for seeing something in me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That's just lovely. And to think that James wrote that when he was 16 years of age is just extraordinary. The insights that he brought to bear on the world, amazing. So thank you very much. It's a very important day for us all, and I know it's a really important day for yourself and for your sons, Hugh and Martin. And at this point, I would like to take the opportunity to share a video that we've created. Well, we didn't create it. I have to say a particular thanks to Kevin and John from Collateral Films, who have worked tirelessly to create I think what is just a gorgeous tribute to James and to honour his legacy on this important day. So I'm going to pass over to Carl and possibly Julianne. I'm not sure. One of you is going to share
Julianne's
the
ready.
video.
Just if I have a problem again, Julianne's ready to share, I think.
Okay, so just to bear with us, this video is about 12 minutes long, but every single second counts.
Okay, let me know if the sound is not available.
James Brosnan, disability advocate, expert AT user, trailblazer. When James was very young, his family decided to make the move from their farm in Kerry to Dublin so that James could go to school at the Central Remedial Clinic.
Sorry to leave Cork, sorry to leave farming, but it had to be. He seemed to show his interest in reading and in education when he was very, very young. And so we decided we had to develop that. We didn't know where we were going, but we just kept at it. We kept at it, and we all the time hoped that somewhere along the line we'd get breaks. I'll never forget the day I heard him speak. I was at the sink washing dishes, and I heard "Hello, Mum" behind me. It was fantastic, even if it had an American accent.
Technology has enhanced my life. I can't function as a social citizen without the means of technology. I do out the timesheets for the personal assistants and wipe out my shopping list every week. I also have control over appliances in my flat, from opening the door to changing pages of books. Every click of my chin on the switch selects every letter in every word that I speak. I would no doubt be vegetating in some home if I didn't have technology.
I know James throughout all my working life. When I started in the Central Remedial Clinic, James was a young kid that had just moved into the school in CRC. And we worked together for the following 23 odd years, mainly he pushing me on advancing technology. Definitely we broke through several glass ceilings regarding technology. James was a leader, he was not a follower. Every time I think of the Brosnans, a smile comes to my face, and particularly James. James made the impossible possible.
I first met James Brosnan about 25 years ago, and I can remember how delighted I was when I found out that in fact he had spent his first few years living on a farm outside Castle Island. I'm from Castle Island as well, and I knew there was a reason why we hit it off from the get-go. James was always a very tenacious and challenging individual in the best sense. He pushed us to figure out really good technology solutions for him, and by God, did he push those technologies to their absolute limits. He was always really generous. He was someone who was very happy to share his expertise, whether that was with maybe a teenager who might be reluctant to use assistive technology, and James would have a chat with that person and share his experiences, or on the many occasions that he was a guest lecturer on so many assistive technology training programs. And he also worked and collaborated on so many projects with university students from Ireland and from the US. James really was a force of nature.
James Brosnan was a huge influence on my life. Me and James first met up mostly in Greater Dublin independent living. Remember James especially who, as a person who could express himself probably better than a person who had full speech. If there was ever a football match on involving Liverpool and the team I support, Aston Villa, I knew I was always going to get a text that was there, "You're going to get hammered tonight, Owen," or something like that. But he sent good humour around. He gave good vibes to everyone he met. And he was a pure gentleman.
I knew James for maybe 10 years or more. I used to provide some technical support for him. I, make sure his laptop was running well, his eye gaze device when he started using that, and connecting up his phone and his other bits of technology. He was one of the most eloquent people I have met, I suppose, in the way he communicated. But he was also very funny and full of devilment and mischief, and he was fun to be around. I learned a lot from James, and I think about him a lot.
There's a type of person in Jamaica, in Jamaican music called the upsetter. So basically somebody who goes in and kicks the hell out of things because things are too normal, or things are too staid, or things are too predictable, and that was James. He would go in and upset things because he hated normality. He hated the banal. Strangely, you know, Patrick Kavanagh talks about the greatness of the banal. James couldn't stand the banal, the norm, the routine. Absolutely just wanted to go out there, kicking everything in sight.
My first memory of James, I was involved in a European project back in, and I remember I've got a video clip that I managed to find from 2006, where he was one of the people who was helping me with user requirements. And I was trying out various gaze tracking systems. James, very kindly, was one of those people involved. And I was asking him to write a particular sentence, "My name is James," on 2 or 3 different eye gaze systems that were under development back then. And the first couple of times it was "My name is James," and then the next one, "My name is James," and he did it very easily. A very smart guy, absolutely brilliant gaze control. The third time he was getting a bit fed up. He said, "My name is James, all right, scumbucket." And he was always surprising you. I mean, you know, my one word is groundbreaker, and like he loved breaking ground. He loved to say something that would shock people, but he also had a very sensitive side too.
I first met James Brosnan at the Media Lab in Dublin when I'd been invited over to plan for a pre-show for the Special Olympics. It was coming to Dublin in 2003, and James was there representing the Central Remedial Clinic, and he said he'd like to be part of the group, and we would devise interfaces and tools together for decades to come.
At Microsoft, we were lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with James on an assistive technology project where he was one of our champion users. James radiated positivity. His smile, his laugh, his quick-wittedness and brilliant sense of humour. There are people who shed a light so great to the world that even after they're gone, their light remains.
It was because of his ideas and enthusiasm and inspiration that enabled us to create a gaming app that James and countless others can play using eye gaze technology. Without James, that project never would have happened. He was an inspiration to all of us, and I know personally that it's a project I'll never forget. He just was very funny, very intelligent, just a people person. I mean, the whole time he was with us, working with us, he didn't stop smiling and laughing.
I taught in the School of Communications in DCU for 23 years. During that time there, I had outstanding students, but one of the most special and indefatigable students of all time, and one of the most talented, was a young man called James Brosnan. I met a young man in a wheelchair who had quadriplegia and cerebral palsy. But he had ears, and he could hear, and he could see. I put on my lecturer's cap, and I started explaining to him that he was going to have to do this and do that, and write essays, and turn up for class, and be part of projects, and have his stuff in on time, and be outstanding, and do all his exams, and do all his recordings. And he turned to me and tapped his computer, because he had a tap technology at the time, and this voice said, "I may be quadriplegic and I may have cerebral palsy, but I'm not deaf." Now, it was my first lesson in how I had approached this brilliant young man and how he had taught me exactly who was going to be in front of him for the next 4 to 5 years.
James is warm-hearted, bright person. As my friend and as my boss, we had so much memories. We help each other in our difficult situation. He always in my mind, heart, and in my prayers.
James was my lifelong friend. I knew him for over 20 years. We had many adventures together and some very, very colorful conversations, and I miss him terribly. Some days I feel like my right arm is missing, but it's all good because James had a kamikaze in nature. He loved to shock people, and he, as we all know, he had an eloquent way with words, but sometimes there was no words or technology needed because he had a look of fierce determination and conviction on his face. And when I saw that look, I knew he meant business, and that look will stay with me always. James, I'll never forget you, and don't ever lose that twinkle in your eye wherever you are.
He opened the door for, I suppose, other people with disabilities to follow his tracks. I think Christopher Nolan mentioned to James some along the lines that you can always follow my wheel tracks, and I think James, that kind of impacted and echoed with James, and he always wanted to leave his tracks there impounding on the path so other people could follow along, doing the Leaving Cert and doing education, doing a third level degree.
Yeah, there was no boundary for James.
That was really important.
James looked at Christopher Nolan and he was an idol for him, and he wanted to be like that too. And I believe his legacy is that people do aspire to live life as much as he did. And with the assistive technology, I suppose, he was able to fulfill his full potential. If James could see us now doing this video now, I'd say he'd had a great old laugh at us. Us in his shadow.
James always took the limelight. We were never allowed to take any shine, you know.
We were always in the background.
James Brosnan to me was intelligent,
adventurous,
a man with a glint in his eye,
funny,
great friend,
independent,
he's a trailblazer,
stubborn,
charming,
funny man.
James is charismatic,
tenacious.
Everyone loved working with him.
Trouble with capital T.
He was full of laughter, full of life, full of devilment, very bold.
Enable Ireland is so proud to inaugurate the James Brosnan Assistive Technology Scholarship. This scholarship will be available to applicants with a disability to apply for a place on our Foundations in AT course on an annual basis from 2023.
That was very good. Oh, that was very good. Oh.
That was a wonderful snapshot of just some of the aspects of the indefatigable and irrepressible James Brosnan, and we are so proud to be associated with him. And I'm very moved,
Oh,
Kevin. I hoped I wouldn't do this, but Kevin, you put such work into this, and it's just been a pleasure. So I don't think there's anything left to say other than congratulations to our amazing graduates today. Thank you to all of our wonderful speakers, and really looking forward to the first recipient of the scholarship in 2023 joining our Foundations programme. And thanks to you all, and we'll leave it there. Bye-bye, everyone.
I'm sorry,
Bye,
everybody. Can I just say something very quickly?
Laura, of course.
I just got in on the very end there. I'm really, really sorry there about James. I had the pleasure of having lunch with Siobhan. James, if I'm right now, Siobhan, correct me if I'm wrong. With yourself and James, myself and Bernard in the college one day, didn't we, Siobhan?
We did, Laura. That's right.
I remember that so well, and the laugh we had and the crack, and I cannot believe that I've just heard that now, and I'm really, really sorry, Siobhan. I know how well you did work with him and how
Thanks,
close
Laura.
you did work with him, and do you know what, Siobhan, I will help you in any way with what I can to keep that going for James, because he was brilliant. He really, really was brilliant, and it was a pleasure to know him as well. I just had to say that.
Thanks a million, Laura.
Well done,
That's
Laura.
lovely. And you collaborated really well with James, and he was the ultimate team player, wasn't he?
Oh, honestly, yeah. And I can remember you and me sitting beside one another, and James and Bernard sitting beside one another and having that lovely meal and chat. It was unbelievable. It was really, really, really special. So I'm glad that I got to do that. And to whoever is there that put this together, I'm really sorry to hear about James anyway. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much, Laura. Well, as I say, it's quite a red letter day for us, and we're really honoured that all of you could join us for such an important day. So I wish you well and hope that today's ceremony and announcement can buoy you forward through the day. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. Well done.
Bye-bye.
All the best, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Careful.